Good morning, everyone. My name is Farhad, and I will be moderating today's academic forum discussion. Our topic today is online learning versus face-to-face learning. Which is more effective? This question is particularly significant in contemporary education, where digital technologies increasingly shape teaching practices and learning environment. Educational institutions worldwide are integrating virtual platforms, hybrid delivery systems, and also digital assessment tools. However, technological adoption alone does not guarantee the pedagogical effectiveness. Alright, before we proceed, it is essential to clarify what we mean by effectiveness. Well, effectiveness in education encompasses several dimensions, which is depth of conceptual understanding, knowledge retention over time, student engagement and motivation, accessibility and inclusivity, social emotional development, accountability and discipline, and also preparation for professional digital environment. Therefore, this discussion requires a multidimensional evaluation rather than a simplistic comparison. Our goal today is not declare one method universally superior. Instead, we aim to critically analyze both models, engage in constructive disagreement, seek clarification where necessary, and negotiate a reasoned synthesis. Allow me to introduce you our panelists, which is Zuhaira, will present argument in favor of online learning, and Irdina, who will argue in support of face-to-face learning. And last but not least, we have Anis, who will be providing a broader conceptual and critical evaluation of both approaches. Let us begin with Zuhaira's opening argument in favor of online learning.
Thank you, Farhad, and I would like to clearly and confidently articulate my position. I contend that online learning constitute an effective, adaptive, and strategically relevant educational model with complementary higher education. My argument is structured around 5 interconnected dimensions: structural flexibility, cognitive autonomy, inclusivity and access, digital competency development, and scalable interaction. So, firstly, the structural flexibility fundamentally transforms access to higher education. Traditional classroom models are inherently bound by geography and fixed scheduling. In contrast, online learning dismantles these constraints. Students who are employed full-time, managing family responsibilities, or residing geographically remote areas are able to engage in academic study without physical relocation. So, this flexibility should not be dismissed as mere convenience. Rather, it represents a structural expansion of opportunity. In this sense, online learning aligns with principles of lifelong learning and democratization of education. Secondly, online learning promotes cognitive autonomy and self-regulated learning. Recorded lectures, archive materials, and modular resources allow students to pause, revisit, and reflect upon complex theoretical concepts. Unlike synchronous lectures that progress uniformly, digital materials accommodate diverse cognitive and speed learning preference. This capacity of repetition reflects my enhanced conceptual depth. Research in educational psychology consistently highlights the importance of metacognitive regulation. Online environments, when designed effectively, encourage learners to manage their own progress, monitor comprehension, and revisit materials strategically. Thirdly, admittedly, critics often argue that autonomy may result in procrastination or disengagement. However, this critique presupposes the absence of instructional structure. Well-designed, online courses incorporate scaffold milestones, automated reminders, formative assessment, and continuous feedback loops. Thus, autonomy need not imply absence of accountability. Thirdly, online learning enhances inclusivity in participation. In physical classroom, Discussion dynamic may be dominated by confident or introverted individuals. In contrast, digital forums provide multiple models of contribution: written posts, moderated and chat function, collaborative document, and asynchronous reflection. Students who may feel hesitant to speak spontaneously in large lecture halls can articulate considered response in writing. This may result in more equitable participation patterns. Fourthly, online learning cultivates digital literacy and remote collaboration competencies. Contemporary professional environment increasingly rely upon virtual meetings, digital documentation, and cross-border communication. By participating in online learning, students acquire not only disciplinary knowledge but also transferable digital skills. And finally, scalability must be considered. Online platforms allow institutions to reach broader student population without proportional increases in physical infrastructure. This may enhance institutional efficiency and expand educational access. For these reasons, I maintain that online learning, when intentionally structured and pedagogical coherent, is not merely an alternative format but a legitimate and effective model of higher education.
Alright, well, thank you Zahira for that comprehensive perspective on online learning. We will now hear the opposing viewpoint. I invite Irina to present the case in support of face-to-face learning.
Okay, thank you Farhad, thank you Zahira. So while I recognize the structural advantages outlined by Zahira, I respectfully maintain that face-to-face learning remains more effective in fostering sustained engagement, relational depth, and embodied cognition. So firstly, the immediacy of formative feedback in physical classroom is pedagogically powerful. So us as educators, we can observe facial expressions, posture, and also the micro expressions to detect any confusion or disengagement between the students. So the clarification may occur instantaneously and organically. So this dynamic responsiveness can strengthen the comprehension and reduce the persistence of misconceptions. So secondly, learning is inherently relational and socially situated. So theories of social constructivism emphasize that knowledge is co-constructed through interaction. So this physical presents enhanced relational immediacy, enables spontaneous questioning, collaborative negotiation of meaning, and also the subtle interpersonal reinforcement. So while digital platforms replicate communications channels, they may not fully reproduce embodied presence. So there exists a qualitative distinctions between mediated interaction and also shared physical space. Thirdly, physical classrooms can establish structured environments conducive to attentional focus. So online learning can often occur within domestic space, which characterized by competing stimuli and digital multitasking. So the physical classroom, by contrast, symbolically and psychologically demarcates a learning space. Fourthly, face-to-face learning strengthens social-emotional development. Through debates, group discussions, and also spontaneous peer interaction, these students can cultivate interpersonal competence, confidence, and also their collaborative skills within each other. So these skills are essential within professional and civic spheres. Furthermore, the accountability mechanism may be more naturally reinforced within supervised physical environment rather than online. So the visible presence of both instructors and peers may strengthen the commitment and also to sustain the participation in the classroom. Therefore, while online learning expands access, I argue that face-to-face learning offers deeper immersion, relational stability, and also to embody engagement that collectively enhance educational effectiveness. So from me?
Alright, so thank you Irdina for that thorough and theoretically grounded perspective. To broaden our analytical lens, we now turn into our third panelist, which is Anis. So Anis will provide us a contextual and critical evaluation of both approaches examining the conditions under which each may be effective. Well, Anis, you may proceed.
Thank you, Farhat, Zuhaira, and Irdina. Having listened carefully to both arguments, I would like to approach this issue not as a partisan advocate, but as a contextual analyst. In my view, the central limitation of this debate lies in its binary framing. The question is not inherently which model is superior, but under what circumstance each model may optimize educational outcomes. Firstly, learner variability is a decisive factor. Students differ in instructive motivations, self-regulation capacity, digital literacy, and socio-emotional needs. Online learning environments may benefit learners who demonstrate strong independent learning skills and technological fluency. However, learners requiring structured reinforcement or emotional scaffolding may experience greater success in supervised physical context. Thus, effectiveness is partially contingent upon learner readiness. Secondly, disciplinary epistemology matters. Conceptual disciplines that rely heavily on textual analysis, theoretical interpretations, and written reflections may transition effectively to digital environment. Indeed, asynchronous discussion forums may encourage reflective depth by allowing time for considered responses. Conversely, practice-based disciplines such as laboratory sciences, clinical training, performing arts, and technical workshops depend upon embodied demonstrations and immediate correction. In such contexts, physical co-presence may be pedagogically indispensable. Thirdly, infrastructural and socio-economic equity cannot be overlooked. Online learning presupposes stable connectivity, appropriate devices, and conducive study environments. In contexts where digital inequality persists, full reliance on online systems may exacerbate educational disparity. However, physical attendance also imposes barriers, including transportation costs and geographic limitations. Therefore, both models contain structural advantages and also limitations. Fourthly, pedagogical design is arguably more influential than modality. A poorly structured online course may produce disengagement. Equally, a passive lecture delivered in a physical classroom may fail to stimulate critical inquiry. Thus, effectiveness emerges not from modality alone, but from alignment among learner characteristics, disciplinary requirements, institutional resources, and instructional strategy. Therefore, rather than asking which is more effective, we might more productively ask under which contextual conditions does each model maximize educational value.
Alright, so thank you Anis, Irina, and Zuhaira for all that statement and facts. Now, and I would like to thank you to the three panelists for your comprehensive opening statements. We will now proceed to the rebuttal stage, which in this session, speakers are invited to critically engage with one another's argument. I encourage respectful disagreement, careful reasoning, and analytical depth. I would like to invite Zu to respond to Irina's emphasis on relational, immersion, and embodied engagement. Zuhaira, you have the floor.
Thank you, Farhat. While I appreciate Idina's emphasis on embodied presence and relational immediacy, I would like to challenge the implicit assumption that physical proximity necessarily produces meaningful engagement. It is entirely possible for students to be physically present in a classroom while remaining cognitively disengaged. Attendance does not automatically equate into intellectual participation. In large lecture theatres, for instance, students may sit passively, take minimal notes, and refrain from active involvement. In contrast, many online platforms are intentionally designed to require structured participation. Discussion board, peer-reviewed assignment, breakout group, collaboration, and track engagement metrics may ensure that each student contributes substantively. Furthermore, I would argue that digital environments can sometimes enhance reflective depth. Asynchronous discussion provides students with time to formulate thoughtful responses rather than reacting immediately. This may improve the analytical quality of discourse. With regard to socio-emotional connection, while I acknowledge that non-verbal cues are very valuable, video conferencing platforms increasingly incorporate visual and auditory channels that replicate aspects of embodied interaction. While not identical, they are not devoid of relational capacity. And finally, I would like to question whether the stability of physical environment is always guaranteed. Classroom disruption, overcrowding, or limited institutional resources may also impede focus. Therefore, I respectfully maintain that engagement is more strongly influenced by instructional design and facilitation strategy than by modality alone.
Alright, so thank you Zohaira for the opinion and argument. So Irina, would you like to respond to these points?
Yes. So, once again, Zahira, I appreciate your points and clarification regarding the instructional design. However, I remain cautious about reducing engagement to measurable participation metrics. While structured online tasks may require contribution, that this contribution does not necessarily imply deep relational exchange. So a written discussion post, though reflective, may lack the immediacy and also dynamic energy of spontaneous dialogue. Moreover, the subtle interpersonal dynamics present in physical classroom, like brief clarifications, shared humors between the students, and also the collective reactions, can contribute to a sense of academic community. So this communal atmosphere can intensify the motivation and also the intellectual curiosity between the students. I also wish to address the issue of cognitive presence. So screen-mediated interaction may introduce what some scholars describe as digital fatigue. So this prolonged exposure to screens may reduce the sustained attentional capacity and also can diminish the spontaneous debates. Additionally, while online participation can be tracked quantitatively, qualitative depth is more difficult to measure, as students may pause frequently without engaging the task critically. Thus, while I concede that online environments can be designed effectively, I maintain that embodied co-presence offers relational immediacy and communal energy that remain pedagogically distinctive. That's all.
Alright, so thank you Irina. Now Anis, as our conceptual analyst, would you like to engage with the arguments presented by Irina and Zohaira?
Thank you, Farhad and Irina. So, the exchange between Zohaira and Irina reveals a crucial conceptual divergence, which is the definitions of engagement itself. Zohaira appeared to conceptualize engagement in terms of structured participations and reflective contributions, while Irina conceptualized engagement as embodied, relational immersions and spontaneous intellectual synergy. Both interpretations are legitimate, however, they foreground different pedagogical priorities. If we evaluate engagement through measurable participations and documented interactions, online platform may indeed demonstrate effectiveness. However, if engagement is understood as dynamic communal exchange, face-to-face environment may hold advantage. This suggests that the disagreement is not fundamentally about capability, but about transactional and transformational learning experiences. Online platform may efficiently facilitate transactional learning, content delivery, discussion exchange, assessment feedback. However, transformational learning, characterized by deep identity shift and collective intellectual awakening, may rely more heavily on relational immersion. That said, it would be reductive to assume that transformational experiences cannot occur online. The determining variable may be pedagogical intentionally rather than modality. Thus, the debate should perhaps shift from which format produces engagement to what type of engagement is required for specific learning outcomes.
Alright, so thank you Anis for your opinion. Before we move to the next phase, I would like to probe further about the information all of you have provided to us. Zohaira, how would you respond to the concern that online engagement may be more transactional than transformational?
Thank you, Farhad. And I appreciate Ani's distinction between transactional and transformation learning. However, I will argue that transformation is not exclusively tied to physical co-presence. Transformational experiences often arise from exposure to new perspectives, critical reflection, and sustained dialogue, all of which can occur within digital spaces. For instance, asynchronous discussion may allow students to articulate complex personal reflection that they might hesitate to express in immediate classroom settings. Therefore, while relational immediacy differs in online environments, transformation remains possible, provided that pedagogical design encourages critical engagement.
Alright, so thank you Zahira. How about Irdina? Would you like to respond?
Yes, please. Okay, so I will just explain it just briefly. So I agree that transformation is possible online. However, I will argue that it may require more deliberate scaffolding. So physical classroom, they naturally generate immediacy and shared presence, which can accelerate trust formation. Trust, in turn, enables vulnerability and deeper intellectual exchange. In digital context, establishing this trust may require additional efforts and intentional community building strategies. So thus, my position is not that online transformation is impossible, but that embodied settings may lower the threshold for communal depth.
Alright, so thank you Irdina for your argument about the opposition issue. While Anis, would you like to provide a final analytical reflection before we transition to clarification and negotiation?
Yes, certainly. The discussion thus far indicates that both modalities possess transformative potential, yet each may rely on different mechanisms to achieve it. Face-to-face environments leverage immediacy and shared embodiment, while online environment leverage reflective pacing and global connectivity. This reinforces my earlier argument. Effectiveness cannot be abstract from context. The determining question is not which format is inherently superior, but which format aligns with the intended learning outcomes, learner profile, and also institutional capacity.
Alright, so thank you Anis for that analytical conceptual. Now, we will now to proceed to the clarification and negotiation phase. In this session, I will pose targeted questions to each panelist to explore more potential limitations in their positions and to identify the possible areas of convergence. Let me begin with Zohaira. Zohaira, while you have convincingly argued that online learning promotes autonomy and flexibility, Do you believe that this model is equally effective across all developmental stages, particularly for younger learners or those lacking self-regulation skills?
Thank you, Farhad. I would like to qualify my earlier position. While I maintain that online learning effective in many contexts, I do not contend that it is universally suitable across all age groups or learner profiles. Younger learners, in particular, often require structured supervision, consistent feedback, and emotional reinforcement. Without sufficient guidance, excessive autonomy may indeed lead to disengagement. However, this does not necessarily validate online learning as a model. Rather, it suggests that implementation must be developmentally sensitive. For example, blended models that combine structured synchronization with guided asynchronous tasks may provide both flexibility and supervision. Thus, my argument is not that online learning is universally superior, but that it possesses significant potential when aligned with learner readiness and supported by appropriate scaffolding.
Alright, so thank you Zahira for that answer and feedback. Now, Irdina, I would like to pose a question to you. You have a strongly defended face-to-face learning on the basis of relational immersion and embodied engagement. However, do you acknowledge that traditional classroom models may exclude certain groups, such as working adults or students in geographically remote areas?
Okay, so yes, I do acknowledge that limitation. So this face-to-face learning, by its very structure, requires physical attendance. So this may pose challenges for students with employment obligations, caregiving responsibilities, and also geographic constraints. In this sense, online learning clearly expands accessibility. However, I will argue that accessibility alone does not guarantee effectiveness. Expanding access is essential, but it must be accompanied by strategies that preserve academic rigor and relational engagement. Therefore, while I recognize the instructional inclusivity of online system, I remain convinced that physical classrooms provide unique pedagogical advantages.
Alright, so thank you Irdina. Now Anis, based on the clarification offered by both speakers, Zahira and Irdina, how might we begin to negotiate a position that recognizes the strength and limitation for each model?
Thank you, Farhad, for the questions. The clarification provided by both speakers reveal an important point, which is neither position is absolute. Zuhaira acknowledged developmental limitation is fully autonomous environments, while Irdina acknowledged structural access limitations is purely physical models. This suggests that both modalities contain inherent strength and structural constraint. Therefore, rather than positioning online and face-to-face learning as competing paradigms, we might conceptualize them as a complementary instrument within a broader pedagogical toolkit. A strategic blended approach appears particularly compelling. For example, theoretical content and foundational knowledge may be delivered online, allowing flexible pacing and also reflective engagement. And then applied seminars, laboratory sessions, and discussion-intensive activities may be conducted face-to-face, capitalizing on embedded interactions and also spontaneous dialogue. In this way, blending learning is not a compromise but an optimization strategy.
Alright, so thank you Anis for that conceptual analyst's point of view. Alright, so to conclude, in one or two sentences, do you all believe that integration rather than opposition may represent the most constructive path forward? How about you, Zahira?
Okay, yes, I do. While I strongly support the effectiveness of online learning, I recognize that strategy integration with face-to-face components may enhance relational engagement and provide balanced structure.
Well, how about Irina?
So I agree that integration may preserve the relational depth of physical classrooms while benefiting from the flexibility of digital systems.
Now, I will ask contextual analyst. How about Anis?
I concur. Educational effectiveness is best achieved through contextual alignment rather than ideological commitment to a single modality.
Alright, so thank you, Anis. As we conclude in this academic forum, several key insights emerge. Firstly, online learning offers flexibility, expanded access, digital literacy development, and also opportunities for reflective engagement. Then we have face-to-face learning that provides relational immediacy, embodied interaction, and also dynamic feedback. And we do not forget the structured attentional environments. Through critical engagement and negotiated clarification, our panel has demonstrated that effectiveness is not an inherent property of modality. Rather, it is shaped by conceptual alignment, learner characteristic, disciplinary requirements, infrastructural capacity, and pedagogical design. Then the debate therefore is not reducible to a binary opposition. Instead, it invites us to consider how educational institutions might strategically deploy both modalities to maximize the learning outcomes. In this sense, a thoughtful implemented blended approach may represent the most pedagogically responsive and structurally inclusive solution. So on behalf of the panel, I thank you for your attention and engagement. This concludes our academic forum. Thank you.